let's get started. It's a pleasure to moderate this, this panel. My name is Fabrizio Ferraro. I'm a professor in the Strategic Management Department here at IESE. And you know, we've been talking in the field of management and organization theories about culture for almost a century now. So Chester Barnard in the 40s and Philip Selznick in the 50s had culture at the core of organization. And they were basically arguing that the core task of leaders is to shape the culture of an organization, shape the culture of a firm. So as organization theorists and management scholars, I think we have always been trying to better understand what culture means, not only internally, but in relation to the broader society. And I think it's interesting that Barnard and Selznick were writing in times of deep uncertainty, historical, you know, the depression in the US, the interwar period, the uncertainty about what the world would look like, whether capitalism or communism would prevail. So deep historical questions that I think we are kind of facing now in some ways. And I think it's not surprising that we think again a lot more and deeply about culture today. And we have a great panel here today to discuss this topic. And we will start with our speaker, Ruth Durand, who is the Joly Family Purposeful Leadership Chair at HEC, and the founder and academic director of the Center for Business and Society there. And Ruth Aguilera, who is the Brodsky Professor of Global Business at Northeastern University, that will discuss the paper. So Rudy will tell us about his current work on the topic, bringing new ideas, I think, to this topic. And I think it's going to be great to listen to that. Thank you, Rudy. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to start by thanking, of course, Jordi, muchas gracias for having invited me here and talking about, you know, this very complicated topic, right? Corporate culture, market categories, and corporate governance. So what is it about? I'd like also to thank, of course, Marco for on behalf of the ECGI for having me here, and all of you for making the time today. Okay, so just an outline of the presentation. So just before I start, so I'm Ruth Durand from HEC Paris. I'm an academic, of course, but also an engaged scholar in the sense that I created this center, Society and Organization at HEC Paris, which is now an institute. But I am also board member of several companies. One is listed. And I'm member also of boards of Entreprises à Mission, Société à Mission in France, for the ones who know the change in law that we had in France in 2019, as well as board member of several nonprofits and a private equity fund. So I try just to connect the practice and what I see and all the things that guys you just showed us, that these different trends, and how can we make sense of it. And basically, I will start by why this question about corporate culture, governance, and market categories. What are market categories? So I will tell you this, because I will define, well, of course, culture and categories first, but I will try to introduce different terms that you probably haven't heard before, because I think that the challenges that we are facing, and again, the ones that you pointed to us, for us, necessitate new terms. And these are some of the new terms that I will share with you. They are not definitive, of course. It's just to have new lenses to try to observe and think through this new reality, duality and multivocality. And I have an argument. So basically, this presentation is how can we make sense of this sentence in 20 minutes? Corporate culture oriented toward pro-social corporate purpose generates a multivocal market category valued and sold by owners, investors. We will press on corporate governance to make it happen. So this is completely incomprehensible. And my challenge is in 20 minutes to have you understand this and perhaps make you change some of your practices. Okay, let's try. Maybe I will fail. We'll see. Why this question? Well, because this is the ending of a period, right? There is a divorce between society and business. You see this in multiple countries, multiple economies, where actually civil society is asking questions. So when you said us, you said society, not the academics, not the professionals, us. There is this divorce that could, you can smell the revolutionary, flavor in the air in many countries. So that means that we have a crisis understanding what is happening, and that profit, as we used it, as we define it, as we measured it for 6 decades or more, is probably an incomplete measure of performance. And we need some extra financial dimensions to be added to that. And we don't know how to do this. That's the problem. The shareholder value maximization mantra is contested. The lawyers have done this and contested this for a while. Lynn Stout is one of the authors, of course. And what happened in France in 2019, this law pact, is exactly about that, changing the law, defining the society meaning the firm, that dated back 1804, Napoleon Civil Code. So we changed it because we need to adjust this. So the shareholder value maximization relies on some assumptions that were operative, and they were considered as such, but they are not operational, not operative anymore. So the premises that the shareholders are the sole owners of the firm is a good approximation, but it's not enough today. Externalities are not accounted for, we need to. And boards, I mean, a very modest board member myself, I told you, start feeling the heat. I wrote a book with the CEO of Veolia, which is a worldwide leader in water and waste treatment, last year. And this is exactly the kind of discussion that we have with him and with many other CEOs. Okay, so I think that time is prime for reflecting about this extra financial performance, the role of firms in society. And there is polarization. You know Peter Thiel and what he said in Miami in March, saying that ESG is CCP, Chinese Communist Party, that there is a big back movement that says that ESG is a hate factory supported by lots of conservative Republicans in the States. And what Gaisha showed us that about the BlackRock, boat tanking a little bit against these kind of accusations. Okay, so I think it's important just to try to understand what is happening in this area, redefining the governance, redefining the role of firm in society and thinking the role of corporate governance in this landscape. Okay, so culture. So the definition, that was interesting, Marco's definition you gave is very economic-based definition. In organization theory, we have different definition, which is not just beliefs, for instance, but it's something that actually consists in an institutionalized logic of action. So the way you observe things, the span of attention, what is salient for you, what matters, the basis of authority within a culture or, an organization or a society, the source of identity, are you the heir of a family founder? Are you a CEO who did Harvard Business School or a top business school and want to maximize his wealth or her wealth? I mean, what are the different identity markers that you have? Or are you a young entrepreneur that wants actually to tackle the climate change? So this is the definition of corporate culture that we'll be using. Corporate culture stems from what shareholders entrust board of directors and related governance bodies to do and maximize. So this was, Paul, what you were saying at the end, that actually we don't know exactly if this translates from stage to stage, from shareholders to board to the organization. I will make the assumption that this is the case in this presentation. And so, in a sense, managers should act for the preservation and expansion of the firm, not for just maximizing shareholder value. This is the legal debate between what shareholders can do and ought to do, and what managers should do and maximize. Not their own wealth, not just shareholder wealth, but protect the firm in the longer term, because the firm is a legal entity on itself. So firms do not just belong to shareholders. This is the big trend about firm purpose. What is the purpose of the firm beyond making profit? So the purpose could be maximizing profit, that's fine, but it may not need to be just that. And the purpose of the firm might be pro-social or not. So here there is like a little play to have, and it's the role of shareholders just to vote at general assemblies and about what the direction of the firm should be, and the board of directors to implement this. So managers should obey boards and shareholders, and the example Paul gave, they actually oftentimes, and Jordi as well, board members are hijacked by the CEOs. We don't receive all the information. We don't do, and cannot do what you said, that going to the sites, etc. So it's very difficult for us to do that. And many cases, you could be hijacked by the boards, and you could be complicit and complacent with that. And so this is here where I introduce one term, So if you are interested in the manifesto that we wrote with an economist and a corporate lawyer from Wilkie Farr, a very well-known corporate law firm, we created some terms, and one of this is not shareholder primacy, it's shareholder duacy. Don't go to the dictionary, you won't find it. We coined the term. So what is it? It's duacy. Why? Because you have two roles, and here is the play on the word property. Of course, you own the shares, so you're a shareholder, you own the shares, so you can vote, you have a right to do that. But what we are saying is that you have more than a right, you have an obligation. And your obligation, especially in these times, is not just to maximize your shareholder value, it's just to think about the consequences of how the firm exploits natural resources which are limited, how the firm actually exploits people as well in different parts of the world, and how you have to respect some regulation that actually try to enforce these rights. And so this is what we call propriety. Is it appropriate? I mean, do you behave as a shareholder appropriately related to what the firm purpose is? And again, I'm not saying that all the firms should be pro-social, right? It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that shareholders should be very clear about their roles. That is not just unique, it's duacy, it's dual. And so maybe you just want to maximize the profit, that's fine. You organize the firm the way you want, with the board of directors you want, for this to happen. That could be a possibility. But there are some other people who think that actually the firm has a role to play, and that actually cannot go against certain limits on this planet, and that exploit people. Nor exploit people. Okay, hence by being purpose-driven, managers act in the interest of the firm and of its shareholders. So this was the first time I introduced duacy, okay? So the shareholders actually have a dual role, and this propriety role has been completely overlooked I mean, for many firms. When you're a family firm, maybe you think of it and you act appropriately. Okay, now the second term I want to introduce, multivocality. Wow, my God, what is this? Okay, so I'm a scholar who studies categories in markets and how actually managers need to co-locate their products in market categories. In 2007, today I can say, what kind of smartphone do you have? In 2007, you didn't know what a smartphone was. You were calling this a BlackBerry. You were calling this maybe a cell phone or other terms. So the terms evolve. The categories of the product change. If I say an e-car, 10 years ago, you didn't know what an e-car was. So these market categories are evolving. And so what I'm saying is that when the firm changes its portfolio of activities and develop different kind of products, the way the clients, the way the investors look at them, the way the audiences look at the firm change. And this is where I will introduce multivocality, the fact that you speak to multiple audiences and you try to do different things. So here again, these are pure definitions. I have no time just to go over that, but just I will give you the flavor. Categories represent a meaningful consensus about some entities' features as shared by actors grouped together as an audience. So if I say tonight, let's go and have a beer, I can say you want to have a pale ale. Everybody knows a pale ale. Now, if I say an IPA, some of you may know, others may not. So the categories change, and so what is the consensus we have? If I consider categories as lenses, the way you see the world through, right? Categories then enables actors to restrict their consideration set. So you don't say, okay, if I go out with Rudy tonight, I mean, what kind of thing I will have to drink? I would say, I said a beer, so maybe you take a beer, right? I restrict the consideration set to a smaller number of identifiable entities. And therefore, different categories of producers will carry unequal obligation, expectation, and rewards, which will affect the range of strategic opportunities they face in the market. If you decide to be a thermic engine car producer, you will be located in one category, and the expectation of the investors will be, of certain kind. If you are a pure player in the e-car, vehicle market, likewise, certain specific categories, certain specific expectations, rewards for being here. And if you are, Volkswagen and all the others that are play, all three together, meaning thermic, e-cars, and hybrid, you will be in the middle, and here you are multivocal, okay? So this idea, imagine that this is the distribution of the different topics, features of an industry, right? So I was using, for instance, car industry. So you have, thermic engine and all the other categories that kind of, probably the type of SUV or whatever. So you could summarize an industry to the main characteristic of a firm. And so what the category literature tells you is that the more you go away from this prototypical, this prototype of what the firm is, and you can apply this to all your industries, if you are in the food production, if you are in the steel production, whatever, in the service industry, you can categorize your firm as being more or less close to the type, the average industry. And the more you go out, the more you go away from this type, research tells you, the expectation and the valuation will be lower for you. And there is another stream of research that says that you can transform this a little bit by putting a goal. And if you put a goal, so for instance, I say, cite me a bird, give me the name of a bird immediately, and you will tell me, I don't know, a robin, a crow, or something like that. You will take a bird that basically flies, sings, etc. You don't say penguin, right? As the first year. This is prototype. But then if I ask you a question with a goal in mind, give me the name of a bird that you can eat, suddenly you don't say robin or crow, you will say, I know, chicken, perhaps. Okay, and so that means that in certain ways, you can change the valuation of category membership when you have a goal. And for the purpose of this talk, I mean, you can imagine social responsible investment, ESG, as including in a very prototypical, basically risk return finance category, a goal that changes the way investors and owners perceive it. This goes back to Oliver Hart and Luigi Zingales, for instance, maximizing shareholder wealth and not just value. Okay, so keep this in mind, and then what you can do, well, basically, you can have different distributions. So on the left side here, low misalignment, you see it's exactly the same. High misalignment, you see that here topics 3, 4, and 5 are overrepresented. And so you can calculate the distance. As much as you can calculate the multivocality, which is the term that I am introducing here, which is in one case, you see that the topics basically here are very similar, although slightly overrepresented in the left bottom side, T1, okay. So one topic, super represented, all the rest not, whereas multivocality, you see all the topics are represented. So that means that you can have a representation of different firms and the way they are representative of their category along these two dimensions. Distance, misalignment, it's easy to understand. What is less easy to understand is multivocality. And of course, in the back of my mind, I have, if you pursue shareholder value maximization or profit, which is very topical, maybe you can also pursue some other topics like climate change or social inequality. And there you start having multivocality. Okay, so this is the second part that is done. How much time do I have?
8 minutes.
8? I think I will be able to do it, well, in 20 minutes. Now, saying that you will really understand the sentence at the end, I'm not sure. But now you have the different terminology, right? We have defined corporate culture, we have defined multivocality. So let me try to drive you through this sentence. And let's start by maybe defining what it means. I read again the sentence: corporate culture, oriented toward pro-social meaning climate, people, corporate purpose, generates a multivocal market category. I think that this part now you understand, because if you add to profit a different kind of feature, that means that you become to have a multivocal culture, right? Valued and sold by owners, investors, not sure. And then, because of what I said earlier, if the investors and the owners believe in this, that means that it will press the corporate governance to really implement it, to make it happen. It? Well, it, in my sense, is a new version of capitalism. I think that, as I said at the start, that we're on the verge of potential riots, revolution in some countries. And if the capitalism doesn't reform itself, my bet is that in many countries, democracy will suffer, if not disappear. Brazilian election yesterday. And so it's a serious debate. And so, but I think that actually we can move this in the right direction. Okay, so let's start going over this sentence again. Remember that? Okay, so shareholder value maximization is really this. Board of directors pursue the shareholder interest, maximize topic one, so there is no multivocality. If you don't get profits, you're fired as a CEO, and basically all the firms align toward that. And that's okay. Pieces of evidence just to move forward in this sentence. Corporate culture oriented toward pro-social corporate purpose generates a multivocal market category. Okay, so here, from a research we have been doing with Arnaud Kudenek, one of my PhD students, we have studied actually all the deals in VC industry in the US. And basically what we do, we studied hundreds of thousands of documents in order just to look at the different topics that firms can have and represent. So these are basically in the business description, the different words and the topics. And you see here that this firm has two topics that are represented here, 1 and 3. This one, you understand, is multivocal because it represents the 5 topics equally. And this one has a very different kind of distribution. So it's misaligned, but low multivocality. So to make the story short, I give you the results of this, all these deals, the 1,600 deals that we studied. And what appears is that actually, so we didn't know what will happen, right? Is that the firms that really super perform are the ones that are low misalignment and high multivocality. And they are significantly superior in their market valuation relative to the other quadrants. So what does it mean? It means that there is here in this industry, let's not overgeneralize, but there are some evidence that actually in this industry, this is, multivocal and aligned firms that succeed. So for me, the way I hear, the way I read this is that actually multivocality does not condemn you to be a low performer. You can be profit-oriented and probably add some topics to your business model and be rewarded by markets, here VCs. Okay, let's keep on. You have some pieces of evidence that show that actually purpose matters for employees. So this is a study from McKinsey. 80% of employees think it's very important for a firm just to do more than just maximizing profit. But 40% of them say that actually purpose statement drive impact. So they, and you can relate this to silent quitting, big resignation, etc. So having another topic beyond purpose is important. We mentioned, I think Anna Loos mentioned that intangibles is very important. So this is the past, this is the future. Intangible value that you can measure, the culture that you can measure will count more and more in the valuation of firms. And actually research for 2 decades in ESG, in strategic management and research has shown that. So we know that firms that are oriented toward ESG actually are more operationally efficient by 10%. We know that they get more patents by 10 to 14%. We know that it creates an insurance mechanism in case of crisis. Their reputation score, their market value diminishes less than the other that are not ESG invested. We know that there is basically, at this point, very little effect on share value or volume of activity on markets, but that long-term investors tend to prefer these firms so that you basically tilt a little bit toward long-term investors, your shareholders, when you do that. And we know that you have a 20% reduction in capital constraints when you are ESG because banks are more and more oriented toward having these kind of companies in their portfolios. So that means that shareholders recognize the value of multivocal, purpose-driven management. Long-term investors tilt their investment towards CSR-active firms. Asset managers develop new market and investment categories, the ESG and CSR, that have been created over the recent years and that Geisha illustrated so well. So therefore, I would say that multivocal firms are valued and sought by owner investors. This is not incompatible. And some study that we did and that was acclaimed by actually practitioners with Marc Desjardins, showing that even the most vigilant and active shareholders do discriminate the firms that greenwash and the ones that don't. So in the study of all the hedge fund activism over 20 years in America, what we did, we looked at whether the firms that had they were CSR active were more attacked by activist hedge fund. And we found this relationship. Yes, indeed, actually. It basically doubled the chances for you to be attacked, well, depending on your governance and the ownership, majority ownership you have, etc. But it doubles the chances for you to be attacked. And when you take into account the fact that CEOs, CFOs are able to associate the pursuit of a CSR objective with the bottom line. So we studied all the calls and roadshows, etc. We coded all this text from the top executive people, and we created an index of vagueness about the way they were able to associate actually CSR with bottom line. So they were using may, should, might, so modal verbs, future tenses, it will produce its effect in 5 years. Okay, all these terms actually categorize the vagueness. And when you include the vagueness in this diagram, all the relationship is driven by the firms that were vague, that were high firm vagueness. These managers were just hands waving. They were saying that they were doing CSR, but they were not connecting this to the core of the business. If you were in the situation of low vagueness, how to associate this with your performance, you were actually not attacked by activists. So for me, this is another indication. Again, it's only pieces of evidence that actually the most aggressive shareholders separate undue managerial value appropriation, purpose washing, from business-related embedded CSR. We also have the new regulation in Europe that forces investors to categorize their investment. I very much like, we had Emmanuel Faber, whom you may know, former CEO of Danone, and now ISSB president, on campus 2 weeks ago. And instead of saying the greenness of a business portfolio for companies or for investors, he said the temperature, the portfolio temperature. That's it. Now you are able just to assess and evaluate for investors the temperature, meaning how many degrees your investments will make the Earth, or planet Earth actually warm up. You have responsibilities to that. So I think that the investors will press on corporate governance to make it happen. And to make it happen, what? The new version of capitalism. So in conclusion, a new narrative. I hear so many, CEOs and World Trade. Not World Trade. World Economic Forum, etc. Talking about a new narrative. It's not so much a new narrative that we need. It's a new model. We need to introduce new concepts to apprehend new reality. DSC for shareholders, or any other term that you may prefer. Multivocality, to understand that actually there is not one objective to maximize, but maybe 2, maybe 3. And that ESG should be written as GES, because governance, depends on shareholders, and they influence the governance structures, objectives, and corporate culture. So corporate cultures then determines how firms are categorized, multivocal or not, and valued by markets. And our role in this room, in our function as scholars, I think, is to educate shareholders, investors, and managers, and policymakers to embrace this new reality and how to value multivocal firms, and researching the condition of superior performance of multivocal firms, because this is not a generic rule. You have some conditions for this to be happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ruth Aguilera. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you, Rudy, for this amazing, thought-provocative talk. My role is to really discuss Rudy's presentation, kind of deconstruct a little bit Rudy's presentation, and then I'm going to do that with 4 points. And then I'll turn to kind of going back to the topic of the conference today, which is corporate culture. Okay? So I will start with his first point, that he remarked that we are at the end of a period. And I'm going to be a little bit provocative, saying that I do not agree with that. I think we should be a little bit softer, because I think there's a strong path dependency to anything, to society, right? Like, we come from somewhere, we're going somewhere. we are here today. So there's a strong path dependency, not only on the institutions, I call it infrastructure, but the general institutions, but also the law that it's very hard to change, even the French law that has been moving on. And all the formal regulation, and Alex will talk more about this today, this afternoon, it's very, even compensation, it's still, despite the ESG in compensation, it's still very much ingrained in this short term and the pressures from institutional investors, etc. So that's one point. Then, I think I would say we're more in a transition period. We're more moving on, and here are 3 examples. The first example, we don't need to go back to Dodge and Ford. We can just go, 10 years ago to the eBay and Craigslist, where really in the lower core of Delaware, the shareholder value maximization prevailed by giving, an award to eBay. But, the other 2 examples that have been mentioned, on August 4th, 19 state attorneys told BlackRock, what are you doing? Your role is really to return investments. So there is, and then just more recently, the other one, just to put another example, California landmark requirement to overrule on the basis of constitutional rights, the fact that women were on boards for, and I've been collecting data since 2018, since the law passed, and the effects of this regulation of having women on boards of companies incorporated in California that was going to spread to Illinois, New York, etc. So this has now been overruled. So basically, I think the role of regulation, the role of government, and the different power accountability, it's really, really important, and in a way is kind of stopping this end of a period and starting another one, and it's really, creating more of a transition period. And the last point that was also mentioned by Rudy is this strong or sharp fault line. So not only that we have a very well organized shareholder value maximization that is not disappearing, but also that lately there is this what's called the anti-woke movement, social movement. And in the US, and that's where I live, there is really, really a very well organized and emerging social movement. And I think that's something that might really start a new or a transition that we need to, the boards need to pay attention to that. So this is point number 1. Point number 2, so this is, I encourage you all to read this shareholder duocy manifesto. It is actually not a communist manifesto. It's a very nice guide on how boards should really engage with the shareholders, with the top management team, and it's very plain English. It's really a really nice document. And it talks about this, like the property capacity has to do with what we understand as the shareholder rights. And the second one is this proprietary capacity. And this is the duocy that Rudy and his colleagues are proposing. And it has to do with what is the responsibility of the firm. And we are here from many countries as well. The responsibility of the firm obviously varies a lot, whether you are incorporated in Delaware or whether you are incorporated in Frankfurt or whether you are in New Delhi. So it has definitely a contextual, very strong contextual point to it. So regarding the proprietary capacity, the second point that he makes, which is the more provocative term, this is really an unresolved issue within the corporate law argument. It's been for a long, long time, they have been discussing, and it's very polarized debate, they've been discussing what's the purpose of the firm. And we have, my colleague, Cindy Williams, that says the purpose of the firm is really, the firm is a stakeholder entity, whereas others say the purpose of the firm and the obligation of the directors is towards the corporation and its shareholders. So I think, like a way to move forward regarding this concept of duocy is maybe to anchor it more in, especially when it comes to the responsibility of the firm, to anchor it more on purpose and articulate what is a legitimate, well-accepted purpose. And then the last bullet point here, how does this corporate purpose diffuse and travels through the organization to the last employee and then outside the organization. So I really like this concept. So I think there's a lot that can be anchored in there. And I do agree that we need new terms to capture the new reality. And I think this is an important one. So Rudy is probably the top scholar in studying categories. and I am not, but definitely what I think it's very useful about the studies on categories is that it's a cognitive tool to help us process a lot of information. So it kind of captures that. And then there is a legitimate, there are legitimate categories that they are like prototypes. And then there is, actors might deviate from or distance themselves from those well-accepted legitimate prototypes. And, in a strategy, many times we talk about being at the fringes of that zone of conformity or of that strategic area where you want to be. So in the case that Rudy presented today, asset managers have indeed created a new category of investment categories, new markets, and this is a very good example of new categories that have emerged in the market. Then there's the term of multivocal. I had to look it in the dictionary. It means signifying many things for different people. And he couples it with alignment, which in a strategy, we generally would talk about fit. And Rudy is more interested in talking about misalignment as opposed to bringing it into the discourse in a more positive way, which is alignment. So my issue with this is that the example that he gives us is the example of shareholder value maximization. So this example, from my point of view, it's an under-socialized. He doesn't take into account other voices. So multivocal to me translates on multi-stakeholder, heterogeneous stakeholder voices. So even in the shareholder value paradigm, there were many different voices beyond the ones that the agency theory tells us, where were the employees, where were the consumers? So the voices are definitely there. So he has this argument that he spent more time on this, so I won't spend as much time. But again, here my concern is, how are these multiple voices aligned? Because this is really the conflict that boards have. How do we manage the conflicting views within the organization? All right, so final point that he didn't have a lot of time to talk about is that the G of governance, really it is what should come first, because it's the framework, right? And then from that governance, we can have the purpose, and from the purpose, we have the softer part, which is the culture. And here, I'm gonna go back to Jillian, which is gonna be here in the afternoon, and switching a little bit and closing here, corporate culture. So this is the topic of this conference, this workshop. Corporate culture from organizational behavior, which is like the main definition, includes values and norms widely shared, and strongly held throughout, so legitimate, they have to be accepted within the organization. And then Jillian and her colleagues in this incredible paper that I just discovered, I'm like a little bit like Gaithka that went to management, I went to finance as a sociologist, and I think this is an excellent paper that talks about the differences between values and norms within corporate culture. And so one of my last point here is that when you ask what is corporate culture to different people, you might have different sets within the organization, different stakeholders, different interest groups, you might have different opinions. So in the paper of Graham and colleagues, they asked what best describes your corporate culture. They interview close to 2,000 North American executives, and these are the results, right? Like very value-based. Then there's a survey that was done last year by IESE in 2022 with Professor Canals and colleagues. And they asked the same, they asked two directors, what is corporate culture to you? And there the answers were slightly different. It's about collaboration, trust, transparency, accountability, and employee development. So not radically different, but, and you can see this, this is a very nice survey. So you can see that it depends who you ask, what is corporate culture, right? So takeaway here, there is a realization that corporate culture is important, yet not the priority of board discussion. And this is also in the IESE survey that they say the number one thing that we're discussing in 2021, 2022 is digital transformation, which was also confirmed by the survey from Paul. So, corporate culture might still today mean different things to different people, and Rudy presented also the employees. From the point that the slide on the employees, it might mean different things. Corporate culture is intangible. It needs to be anchored in the purpose, and then this purpose needs to be translated into norms and practices. So my last slide here is When we think about corporate culture and the role of the board in this ecosystem, I would like to make a plug for thinking more about deliberative governance. What is deliberative governance? It's basically including the voices, so maybe multivocal, but including the thinking or the inputs of the different stakeholders, at least acknowledging them and deciding what to do with it. And this is, this is a couple of Swiss German scholars that they are really bringing in this idea of deliberative governance, which means opening up the pie and having a more multivocality within the governance. So a little bit borrowed from the manifesto here, 4 points that boards should do. So boards should understand what shareholders want, what is the corporate culture that they want to prevail in the company via having a very articulate, legitimate purpose. They should activate the governance, if that's their role, safeguard, foster, evaluate, and then revise, entrust and monitor the top management team, and then the top management, manage these stakeholders, across the corporation in terms of the culture. So this would be my recipe, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you Thank you so much for putting this in context. I think also there is some areas where I don't know if you want to, anything you want my reply to, or we can.
No, sorry. No, just let's take question. We will discuss with Ruth later.
In private.
In private, if you have questions.
So we can take maybe Alex first. And of course at home, so if there is anyone, if there are people at home, feel free to send the questions and I will bring them up here.
Thanks, both were very interesting presentations. So I wanted to ask about this Duis idea, which this novel term that you've coined. You said there's property which nobody would disagree on. You own an asset, and then there's proprietary, which is you have an obligation to manage it in a certain way. Where does that obligation come from? So if you have ownership, so let's say somebody orders food from a restaurant, you could choose not to eat it. Maybe I should think you should give it to the homeless, but there's no obligation. If somebody bought my book, they could burn it. I'm not happy about that, but that's their right. As long as they don't do something illegal, like hit somebody on the head with it, they can do what they want. So is this something which is illegal, or is it normative and moral? And if it's a normative right to run a company in a certain way, who decides what's correct? So we were discussing over dinner yesterday, if we have an energy company, do we have a just transition which preserves people's jobs, or do we want to decarbonize as quickly as possible? So if you do have a responsibility to run it in a certain way, where does that come from, the law or something else? And if it's something else, then who decides what the objective is?
It's normative. I think that when I say the end of a period, it means that, basically, I think that the cues that show that the world is dismantling itself are quite numerous. I mean, and I think it becomes the responsibility of the owners, the investors, to think out of the box and change a little bit the model of the firm that they have and take their responsibilities. So it's normative. And again, I'm not saying that they should do this all, or they must, or etc., but that at a certain point in time, the degradation of the conditions for economic activity make this to become a systemic risk for the Vanguard and all the others. They have understood this for now maybe 5-6 years, and so that means that it also in their best interest to reduce the risk of exposure that they have, for the board of directors to reduce the asset liabilities that they have, etc. So it's changing. So that's what I mean. So then, I'm not a moral philosopher just to tell you exactly if this should be, Aristotelian ethics, Levinasian ethics, deontology, Kantian ethics, and this, I think, it's to us, depending on your own values as part of this humanity of humankind. If you are owning assets, you have a responsibility to preserve first the interest of the firm for the longer term, but also something a little bit beyond. So, take it from religion, take it from your own culture, but do your job. It's your responsibility. I think that the way that you say that, it's not, I'm just maximizing because Milton Friedman said it 70 years ago. not receivable anymore.
But then who decides? Because if it's your own values, maybe if my value is I don't eat pork, then maybe I should buy all the pork factories and then shut them down, but somebody else might disagree with that. So who decides what the obligations are beyond?
You.
But then you would do that anyway. So if it's a normative thing, then I would, in any case, then it's sort of meaningless, because I would then operate an asset in whatever way I want to, so then there's no real requirement there. So isn't an obligation, I would do it.
I mean, the obligation, I mean, democracy relies on the freedom of association. So if you find similar people thinking like you, that you don't need to care about all of that, just associate with them, develop a society, and let the free market happen. What I'm telling you is that the competitive advantage of firms that will rely on this is disappearing, and that multivocality says that owners, investors, asset managers are turning themselves towards just trying to understand the value in different ways. The part of the intangible that represent in stock markets between 60 and 70% of the total valuation will diminish as the explicitation of the value of corporate culture, of multivocality will increase. So you can do it with your peers, and let's see in 15 years, I mean, whether your company survive or not. I think that they will not survive. I think that, you know, for a decade, the average performance of, let's say, the green companies was lower than the brown companies, and the volatility was higher. Today, the average performance is similar, and the volatility reduces. So even from a financial aspect, investing in this kind of companies, you know, makes more sense, more financial sense. So again, I'm not saying that all the firms should do that. Let's get the free competition, the freedom of association happen, and let's see who will succeed. I'm an engaged scholar. I think that actually we have means of understanding the condition under which the purpose-driven companies could outcompete the others. And I'm not saying that they overcompete them in any case, in any condition, but that there are some conditions to make this happen. And corporate culture is one of them.
Thank you. Question here? Yeah, Marco.
Thank you. I mean, that was a clearly very thought-provoking presentation. So you went from shareholder control to corporate purpose and then to culture. So that's great, because we could understand that. So maybe it's actually a bit broader than shareholder control. I mean, you know, somebody's in control. Now, so I understand that too, the controller decides. Now, if you take that perspective, it's a bit in contradiction with what Gaishka presented before, because he showed us that, you know, the model so far has been to have an independent board and independent directors, and you saw the numbers on the screen. So are you proposing that we go back to having the controller really decide? And then, of course, there's Alex's question, who is the controller? But in some sense, you're proposing to reverse the kind of corporate governance model that we've been developing for the past 20 years.
Why do you say, I'm sorry, could you elaborate a little bit? Why would I say that
Well, if you want the controller to define the purpose and the culture, independent directors are supposed to be independent. So that's a contradiction.
But we know that independent directors actually don't play such a big role. No, what I'm thinking is that, that's true that I think that the shareholders should be a little bit more conscious about the role that they have, and that the people who are sitting in the board of directors should be probably more competent about certain things, especially climate related, etc. So the you know, the French Association of Administrators, I mean, of board members, did some studies, and we know that, you know, so in France we have a law that actually we have 40% of women in boards. That's compulsory, but so the age of the average age of the board member is beyond 65, etc. It's like, you know, driving license. You know, at a certain point in time, you probably need just to be sure that everybody knows the, you know, the, how you say that, the code de la route, you know, to understand that. And if you are pushing me a little bit, I think that as much as in certain companies, you need to be certified in terms of your competence in finance, etc. I'm a promoter of a certification of board members in terms of sustainability, understanding the, the big, the big trends, the numbers, etc., the impact of your investments on carbon or this kind of thing. And I don't, so that's part also of the multivocality. So I think, yes, this control, so I'm not saying that you need to go back, well that's, at least I need to think more about it. This is not what I meant. But independent board member can do only what they can. I'm an independent board member, and I see very well that my action is limited. So, but it's more about the ethos of the board. What are the things that you should focus on? Culture is about focus of attention, principle of authority. Is it the male alpha, hyper testosterone CEO, just the guy you really want these days? Or are there different kinds of people who are more listening, deliberative, seeing the risks in other parts and not just the operational part, but also the reputational and the human side within the company, etc.
Ruth, go ahead. Yeah.
So I'll just follow up a little bit on this question because, where does this come from? I think that's a very interesting question that you're raising here. And I do think that it comes from first assessing from the board the systemic risks, like the overall risk which come from society, right? And these risks are moving. So it's important to have a broader view, which is this multivocality, or you can call it, in the old language would be multi-stakeholder views, interests. So you need to attend to some of these because it might affect your reputation, it might affect your compliance, it might affect your environmental mitigation, different types of risk, but looking at it from the point of view of risk as a board, looking at it from the point of view of the risk. And where does it come from? It comes from society. It comes from your employees that decide between two companies, and company A has a better culture that they've been able to assess, and therefore they have more retention, more commitment, less turnover. So that's a risk, the risk of retention to your employees. So kind of taking the temperature or assessing the society, so the demands from society. And this is where I bring the deliberative governance. You need to look at, because before in shareholder maximization, it's like, we're going to maximize shareholder value at any expense. But here is looking a little bit at the society and at the different pockets within society and which one we want to tend to. Our company right now is doing a lot of energy. So maybe digital is not as important, maybe safety is more important. So just kind of from that point of view, like the societal demands. And I don't see it as much normative. I see it more as an instrumental, to be honest, because it's a more long-term, but more sustainable, financially sustainable, in addition to other non-financial sustainability. So I don't see it as normative, because I don't think if we propose it as normative, we're going to be able to convince decision makers.
Maybe because I think there is perhaps behind this question as well, there are proposals for making structural changes out there where some of the constitutive stakeholders would have a bigger play. Not only in Europe, where in some countries they have, but in the US, Leo Strine, labor should be directly represented, perhaps other core stakeholders. So it seems that both of you are saying, no, we don't need that. We're just gonna be doing, shareholders will understand that this is part of the role. Don't you think that to arrive at a more deliberative corporate governance, we actually do need to have a direct representation of core stakeholders?
But new representation, I would say new, like Starbucks, like very advocate, one of the 181 signatories of the Business Roundtable, but then they don't want to unionize. They are very much against Starbucks unionizing. Well, they need to create other mechanisms to incorporate that voice.
Yeah, for me, I'm not favorable of the dual chamber. So having like,
supervisor.
Yeah, at this point, maybe I will change. Like 15 years ago, you would have asked me, I would say that the corporations will be the engine of progress, etc. Well, I changed my mind. I think it's the investors and shareholders, the corporates, the CEOs I know, etc. are, completely, tied up by the markets. So then if the shareholders don't change, And so I don't, so as of today, I don't think that the dual chamber having, a second body validating some of the decision of investment, etc. Having like Veolia, I mentioned Veolia before, they have like a second chamber, they call it the critical friends, when NGOs, etc. are present and that really criticize their strategy, then they take stock, but the board of directors is the one that decides. That I'm super fine with that, but not to have a validation by a second chamber of stakeholders. So you have different ways of doing it. You have shadow, shadow boards. Actually, I'm working with one where actually new generation 30 plus that are aspiring just to become executive committee members, etc., are just making their teeth on this kind of question and tackle them very differently from the current board members. This is good as well. So you have different ways to integrate this, I think.
We have time, maybe very quick last question.
I have to say thank you for this innovative and creative and patient discussion we are having now, because indeed Ruth changed the path of my question, because I was about to do the question and you changed this, but thank you at the same time, because we both agree on what we are saying. And I only want to ask you, Rodolphe, you were saying the corporate purpose generates a multivocal, and for sure, but the question is from the corporate or is from the society? Because as Ruth was saying, the more pressure I think is from the society. And as you said, if we are not able as a corporate to adapt to this new scenario, we will die. It's probably, we will disappear, some companies in that way, And it was what I was to say, but sorry, Ruth, but you changed the path of my question.
Sorry.
And thank you.
Yeah, I think that's
very good.
Thank you. So I think we'll take this. So we are actually back on time, perfectly on time. So I just want to thank you both for the provocative presentation and discussion and all the questions. So we'll have we're just going to move to the next session, and we have another 15 minutes break, very quick break like before, and then we'll come back for the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.